It appears the Royals might have dodged a bullet with Vinnie Pasquantino's hamstring. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can catch me on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, at JohnnyJ_15. To spell that out, it's at JOHNYJ_15. And when you listen to this podcast, you can pretty much catch it anywhere. That could be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey. And if you like video, we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So get started today before the Sweet 16 hits over at FanDuel. For you first-time listeners, actually a fun day to be joining in for. I always say it's a fun time to be joining the episode or joining this podcast, but truly there is no better time with opening day just a few days away, which will be on Thursday in front of a sold-out Kauffman Stadium. Cole Reagan's Tanner Bybee on the bump for Cleveland. But the reason I say today's a good day, we have 2 episodes out, actually. So if you go to our YouTube page or you go to any of our apps out there, you can see our AL Central preview, which we got all of the hosts to get together for. Was a really fun time. Spoiler alert, just so I can call myself out. I didn't pick the Royals to win it, but not because I'm not a believer. It's because I didn't want to be the biased podcaster going on and saying the Royals had the best players. The Royals are going to win this division. I had to show some love to the other teams out there. So if you get mad at me at that, that's a little bit of my reasoning for it. But again, we'll be bringing you this episode. We bring you 5 episodes a week. And that'll be carrying all the way into January. So even during the off season, for those first couple of months, we're still bringing you 5 episodes a week, 30-minute episodes. I still love doing it, not burned out on it at all, and I am getting fired up for opening day on Thursday. And I know another guy is very fired up and ready to play on opening day, which is Vinnie Pasquantino. And we all know about the news of Vinnie Pasquantino having to leave the game on Saturday with what appeared to be a right leg injury. We come to find out after the game that it's a hamstring strain, and everybody's on pins and needles after that. You're holding your breath. We heard Vinnie say in the post game that he felt fine. His gut told him that he felt fine, but his gut's not the training staff. And the training staff is going to be a little bit more cautious in saying, hey, even if you feel good, this is a muscle injury. This is a hamstring injury, and rushing you back for the first week of the season isn't worth losing you for months, right? If you're only 85, 90%, let's just put you on the injured list and go from there. Now, Andy Rogers, who covers the team for MLB.com, gave an update about 5 minutes before I hit record on this episode. So it worked out well for me. I was starting to wonder if I couldn't do one till later on in the evening because I wasn't sure if we were going to get an update in time. But she gave this report as of 4:42, and it's that Vinnie Pasquantino has a grade 1+ hamstring strain. He's doing everything he can to be ready for opening day. He won't play in Arlington. They'll be here today, or be there, I should say. I'm in Kansas City, but they'll be there tonight. Mike will walk on the bump, and then they'll also play tomorrow before heading home to Kansas City. They'll be off on Wednesday, and then you have opening day. But he's not going to be playing in Arlington. That was never going to be on the table, in my opinion. But he plans on hitting in the cage today and then on the field tomorrow. The biggest box to check is being pain-free when he swings. My initial takeaway on this is that the fact that opening day is on the table is already a bonus, is already an absolute plus, considering how difficult hamstring injuries can be. And if he goes out in the cages tonight, or he goes out there on the field tomorrow, and there's just the slightest pain, slightest discomfort, it's not worth forcing the issue. I understand for a guy like Vinny, who fans, feel can be injury prone from time to time. I believe last year's injury you can throw out because it was a freak play. Like, I don't look at Vinny's broken thumb and say, well, of course he got hurt there. He's made of glass. Nobody should be saying that. If Lucas Erceg doesn't try to field a comebacker with his bare hand and throw wildly to first, He doesn't get hurt on the play. But it is sports. That's baseball. He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he collided, I want to say, with Yainer Diaz. Broke his thumb. That set him back, and then he did return to the postseason, which was already remarkable, but he was not the same type of hitter. For this, we know Vinny wants to be out there badly. I mean, opening day is a huge honor to be a starter, sold-out crowd. You get your name called. You're running out there like a playoff game. But if it means keeping him healthy for 150 games or 155 games, then all the better. I know that would suck to not be out there on opening day, but already the good sign for this is they're not ruling out opening day. If they would have said, yeah, we're not going to do anything on that leg for 2 weeks and then we'll reevaluate, I'd be far more concerned. Like Vinny says he wants to play. If the training staff says, hey, it's a grade 1+ strain, which it is graded on a scale of 3, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a doctor here, so I'm doing this on the fly to give you as much information as possible. But I want to say grade 1 strain is very mild. I do want to make sure I give you the exact definition so I don't lead anybody astray here. But yes, a grade 1 strain is a mild muscle injury that occurs when the muscle fibers are stretched or slightly torn. Symptoms, the mild pain, tenderness, slight swelling. And then I want to say 1+ would just mean a slight step up from that. But grade 3 strains are pretty severe. Yeah, so it goes 1 to 3. I want to say there's not a 4th or a 5. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not working with athletes, so I don't know the exact terminology for each and every one. But grade 3, per Google here, my best source, is a complete rupture or muscle or tendon tear. So he doesn't have that. It's a 1+ strain, which means mild discomfort, mild pain, was just stretched a little bit too far, which is what happened in that game on Saturday. He makes sure that's good to go, and the training staff says you can't hurt it any worse. Then, yeah, being able to play on opening day is very much a possibility. And with the way they're talking about it, here's the interesting part. Vinnie Pasquantino was telling everybody about his thumb injury last year, that he was going to play. My season's not done. I was even wrong. And I said that he's probably not going to play. That is an injury that needs time to heal. And if Yuli Gurriel's going, there's no need to rush him back. Yet he kept saying, I'm going to play. And lo and behold, he was in the lineup in the postseason, which was absolutely absurd. We're not even talking about the ALDS. He played in the wild card series. And I don't care the numbers weren't great. That showed a lot of guts out there. So if Vinny is telling everybody, I'm going to play, I feel that I can play, I'd put money on that he's playing. Now, the training staff, they're not going to let him be reckless. So if you go into the cages tonight and all is well, then we just go to that next day. If he's on the field and he feels good, then you have that off day, a little extra rest, and you're good to go by opening day. On the flip side, if there is that pull, if there is that discomfort, maybe you just sit down and say, the first week of the season, maybe let's just make sure we're 100%. Let's worry about that. The Royals and Vinnie Pasquantino can survive 7 days without each other. They could put somebody over at first base, like Mark Canha. We'll talk about him in the second segment. They can put Salvi at first. And yes, they are losing production. It's also the first week of the season. And if he's really close to ready, then he's just on the injured list for a short amount of time, and then he'll be good to go, right? And you're not worrying too much the second week of the season, because the season's not going to be won or lost in the first 2 weeks of April. That is just the reality of this situation. But I believe it's truly good news. I believe the update that Andy Rogers provided today on Vinny is great news for the Royals, because those non-contact injuries, they're always scary. Especially when they're happening the day that spring training in Surprise ends. We saw Royce Lewis once again from Minnesota, that one of their star players who is notorious for being injury prone, busted down the line, and then he really was grabbing at his hamstring there. And those hamstring injuries, they linger. Back injuries, they can linger. Oblique injuries is where I get very nervous, because oblique injuries can go on for the entire year. It's not going to be a 60-day IL stint. But it could be that 15-day, they're not ready, another 15 days, another 15 days, and then eventually you do it so many times, they're going on the 60-day. So with a hamstring strain, it's good to hear it's only a grade 1 plus, as it's called here. Grade 3, we would have known. He would have collapsed on the field. We would have known that would have been likely the end of his season. But a grade 1 seems that he's going to be just fine. I know that he is one of those guys that is always going to want to be out there, always be playing. The training staff is not going to rush him if he's not ready. But also, if he feels good and there's no setbacks here in the next 2 days, my guess is that he's out there on opening day against the Guardians coming up on Thursday. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, what type of impact can Mark Canha give this Royals lineup? We'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today in Just Ingredients. When it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why Just Ingredients is changing the game with clean, high-quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Just Ingredients offers an NSF-certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout, and creatine, all tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients is also partnered with two-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF-certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. Visit justingredients.us and use code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off. Again, that's LOCKEDONMLB, LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off. And for more wellness tips, follow at just.ingredients over on Instagram. So don't waste any time. Get started today with Just Ingredients. One of the moves of this offseason we just didn't have the luxury of talking about right after it happened was Mark Canha being acquired by the Royals on, I want to say it was Saturday afternoon, or it might have been Friday. I believe actually it was Friday afternoon when this trade went down. I had already been out on the road, wasn't around my computer, and just decided after Sunday when we have our mailbag segment, which is usually on Friday for you new listeners, but since we had to push it a few days later to Sunday, I thought I'll just save the Mark Canha talk until, Monday's episode, because we did have a lot to talk about, which is great for me because on Thursday, it's a brand new season. We're not talking about offseason stuff anymore. We're not talking about any potential moves likely until you are going to be having trade deadline talks when you have those rumors start swirling again. On opening day, Thursday, I'm not going to be expecting, any more trade talk or free agent talk until about the middle portion of the season. And as you just saw me glancing down at the phone, if you were watching here on YouTube, Annie Rogers has just reported that the Royals have announced their first run-through in the rotation. I don't believe it's that much of a surprise other than Chris Bubich being the number 4 starter, actually. We called him the number 5 all off season long, but Reagans will go on Thursday. Seth Lugo is going to go on Saturday. Then Michael Wacha is going to go on Sunday. Chris Bubich will go on that game on the 31st in Milwaukee, and Michael Lorenzen will go right after that. So that's the first 5 you will see for the Royals. So if you're planning to go after opening day, you're going to Saturday and Sunday's game, you're going to see Lugo, then you're going to see Michael Wacha, and then we'll just reevaluate this after they come back from their series in Milwaukee. But speaking of Milwaukee and the Brewers, that's where the Royals acquired Mark Canha from. And to be honest with you, this was the bat I had wanted them to seek out once it was very clear that that true middle-of-the-order bat was not going to be found with what was left in free agency. The everyday starter, the guy you're expecting to drive in 85 to 90 runs, maybe run into anywhere from 25 to 30 bombs, that just wasn't going to happen, at least before the regular season began. And when I saw who was still left out there, Mark Canha felt like the most perfect fit. And I want to say we had a discussion about it around that time, maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks ago. And then when he signed the minor league deal in Milwaukee, I went, that's kind of odd that the Royals didn't go the extra mile just to bring in Mark Canha. Maybe they did, and he decided that, no, I want to hold out and wait for a better offer. He didn't get one. The Royals had lost interest, and then the Brewers were the one to give him a spring training invite. He didn't play well enough in camp with the Brewers to earn a spot. The Royals likely knew that, called knowing that he was in a roster crunch and said, we're willing to give you a player to be named later or cash for Mark Canha. They got the deal done. The reason I love this move is Mark Canha was an above-average hitter last year. And to have that on the bench, if you have somebody who was an above-average hitter over the course of 100 games, you feel good about what you're getting. Like when they went after Adam Frazier last year and Garrett Hampson didn't have a bad year in Miami. Frazier did not have a very good year in Baltimore. And you knew that those numbers were likely to regress. It's not that Mark Canha is immune to regressing, because he has regressed enough where teams are just not looking to give him big league contracts anymore. But he still hits lefties incredibly well. He had a 102 WRC plus last year, 2 points above the league average. His walk rate was 11%. So now you look at two guys on your bench that have double-digit walk rates in Cavan Biggio and Mark Canha. I believe Biggio's making the roster, though it's not official just yet. But Canha's that guy that you could platoon with MJ Melendez in left. You could platoon at first base if Vinnie Pasquantino's not ready to go. And he's somebody that can stay on this roster for the long haul. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. You're not putting a ton of financial strain on your team in keeping Mark Canha around. And so what I believe he brings to the table is a professional at bat, somebody that can play a corner outfield spot and first base. He can work the count. He can hit around 240 to 250, get on base at a 340 clip, and that's something they just didn't have off the bench. We knew that J.J. Piccolo was very interested in bringing up the on-base number at the very end of the season press conference. We need to look for guys that can get on base, right? We need to look for guys that can work the count. They wanted Jonathan India. They got Jonathan India. But then these two other minor moves, they weren't headliners. Canha and Biggio are not headliners, but it's just lengthening out your lineup a little bit more. It's giving you some extra flexibility there. And even if Mark Canha hits 220 this year, I believe he still gets on base at a 330 clip. If Cavan Biggio hits 190, I believe he gets on base at a 310 to 315 clip. Those are both upgrades over what you had with Hampson and Frazier off the bench last year. And to start the year, it's better than what you had with Nelson Velasquez. So even though the power is no longer there for Mark Canha, I believe the professional at-bats, the getting on base ability, that's still a part of his game. And in his Royals debut in spring training, we'll also see him tonight when they're at Globe Life Field. I keep calling it Globe Life Field and Globe Life Park. But we're down at Globe Life in Arlington tonight and tomorrow. We'll probably see Mark Canha out there. He's at first base tonight, but in his Royals debut on Saturday, I believe it was, he went 3 for 3 and had an exit velocity on one of his singles of 110. So there's still a little bit of juice in that bat. For Detroit last year, I thought he was very serviceable. He was fine for them to have off the bench, and at times played pretty consistently in the everyday lineup. With San Francisco, he was really damn good, but he was just not something where he was going to stick around for the next year. It was just, hey, we're picking up a guy that, Detroit was no longer willing to give a roster spot to. They were having guys come off the injured list. San Francisco had a spot. He played well. Okay, move on, and we'll wish you good luck. We'll hope you land somewhere else on a big league deal. That didn't happen for him, but at least now, despite not getting a big league deal, he gets traded from Milwaukee to Kansas City. Who's going to give him a roster spot? And I believe that it's a little bit in belief of what Mark Canha can be for this team as a platoon hitter, but also that they were not very high on the guys that were fighting for that final bench spot. I know Joey Wiemer was making a very strong push, and who knows, maybe he beats out Dairon Blanco. He doesn't in my projection. I've also been wrong now a few times with who's going to be on the opening day roster. But with Fermin out there, with Blanco, with Biggio, Mark Canha rounding out the bench, that feels a little bit more suitable than maybe having to gamble again with Nick Pratto or Nelson Velasquez. Because with Matt Quatrero, he loves to rotate guys in the lineup, and you need to be able to trust somebody coming off the bench to give you good at-bats and not be a black hole, as we saw from time to time with Garrett Hampson and Adam Frazier. So I really like the pickup. I doubt if Vinnie Pasquantino is ready by opening day, he'll be in the opening day starting lineup, but we'll be seeing a lot of Mark Canha early on in the season. And I like how J.J. Piccolo was trying to just get an advantage somewhere in the depth department, and I believe he got a pretty damn good one in Mark Canha. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, the Carlos Hernandez era is over in Kansas City. The Phillies have claimed him off waivers, so he'll see if he can figure out things over there. But what did we make of Carlos's time here? And are the Royals truly going to regret letting him walk away for pretty much nothing? I'll give you my thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Our last sponsor we're going to give a shout out to is our title sponsor in FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com to get started before the Sweet 16 gets here. And I know that I've been wrong more often than not with some of my March Madness picks. I did have Florida cutting down the nets, but for fun, we'll look at that BYU and Alabama game. It feels that every time it's going to be a guarantee to be the over. It hits the under, but I'll try to roll with what everybody's saying in this go-around. Once again, I'll take the over between the Cougars and the Crimson Tide in this Sweet 16 game coming up on Thursday, I want to say it is. For our final segment, we are going to be diving into the news of some roster decisions the Royals made, and most notably, Carlos Hernandez being picked up by the Philadelphia Phillies. The Royals decided to go with Chris Stratton. That surprised me. As I mentioned in the previous segment, I've been wrong a few times now with my roster predictions, and that was one I just was never that confident on about 2 weeks into the season. Like from that time to now, I just wasn't 100% sure if Hernandez was going to get that spot. But I banked on the Royals going with upside over what Chris Stratton is. And in the end, they decided to go with the more reliable option in Chris Stratton. And despite some of those bad numbers from last year, you could make the case that it was a little bit fluky, and it more so was about how many guys he was walking. He usually was somebody that was great with command. He had pitched with Texas the previous year. He had had good years in St. Louis. He had had a good year in Texas. The Royals are counting on him to be their mop-up guy. It's a blowout game. Go out there, throw strikes. Don't let the lead, balloon to much more than that. And maybe they felt more confident that Chris Stratton could do that over Carlos Hernandez. And there was never a shortage of opportunities for Carlos Hernandez. He had his fair share of chances in the regular season and in spring training. He never took a job and ran with it other than 2023 when he was pitching well in the back end of the bullpen. And the Royals made the mistake, and I believe now they can officially tell you they made the mistake of hanging on to him because relievers are always meant to be traded. You can get a couple of good years out of somebody, and the minute they hit that peak value, if you're not going to be a serious contender, you unload that reliever. And they had a perfect opportunity back in 2023 to unload Carlos Hernandez. They trade Barlow instead. He's another, example of that, where Scott Barlow had peak value. He was young. He had years of control. They wanted to hang on to him because they felt they were closer to contention than they really were. They didn't get much for Scott Barlow. When it comes to Carlos Hernandez, they might have gotten more because of the pure power stuff that he possessed. But as soon as Scott Barlow was traded, it almost felt like the career trajectory for Carlos Hernandez went down the drain. I mean, we know those graphs they have, right? Maybe it's with stocks and stuff where it goes up and down, or sometimes it's a continuous upward trend. Sometimes it's straight down to the bottom. With Hernandez, it was an upward trend, and then it just went straight down. It was the blue line, the blue squiggly line going down. And it all happened once they moved Scott Barlow because he got thrust into the closer's role. It didn't work out. He never really recovered from that. He was used as an opener. He was a starter at one point in Kansas City. At the end of the day, it just didn't work out. And the Royals in the bullpen want more reliability. Unfortunately for Carlos Chris Stratton has done it more at a consistent level in the big leagues than Hernandez did. And don't get it twisted. Chris Stratton is not going to be pitching in his bullpen in very high leverage spots. He will probably be that one to go in there when it's 6-1 in the ninth, as he did a few times last year. But that leverage role, you can throw pretty much anybody in there. The game is either already won or lost at that point. If the Royals are up 10-1, he can go throw enough strikes out there. Hernandez, despite that powerful fastball, it was straight and it was hittable. And he did have some success late last year, which is why I'm sure the Philadelphia Phillies took a chance on him. I mean, why would you not take a chance on a 100-mile-an-hour fastball? But at the big league level, velocity is not everything. It's important, and I am one of those guys that loves taking a chance on high-powered arms, because if you tap into that potential, if you reach that ceiling, they can have a very successful career. And fortunately for Carlos Hernandez, he's not a very injury-prone guy. Despite throwing that hard, he's got repeatable mechanics, and he's found ways to stay off the injured list more often than not. But on the mound, he just isn't consistent enough, and the Royals aren't willing to give him a roster spot. And for the Phillies, if they tap into something again, because the Royals did tap into something with Carlos Hernandez. He was successful at times as a starter in 2022, I want to say it was. Maybe it was 21. But as a starter, and then as a back-end reliever, he found some success. There was something going for the Royals there. It just didn't stick. And if the Phillies find something in Hernandez and it works out, that's just baseball. There's this misconception, I believe, that everybody that leaves the Royals, they go find success elsewhere. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. We just don't hear about the guys that aren't successful. And for the Royals, it happened with Yoel Payamps in Milwaukee. It happened with Ryan O'Hearn in Baltimore. It's happened with guys like Gabe Spire up in Seattle. Relievers are easier to fix than any other player out there. I know O'Hearn's not. I was just throwing him into this conversation. But the Royals have also done a better job in the past now of hitting on some guys that other teams have given up on. And sometimes it's just for a few months that you find something special in that reliever or in that starter or in that bench bat. But the Royals are not this isolated team where, they let somebody walk and they thrive elsewhere. Sometimes it's just a change of scenery. And who knows? I mean, I thought Dylan Coleman had a chance in the Houston Astros organization to really catch on and become something. He hasn't. In fact, I don't believe he got to Houston last year. He was just stuck around, struggling in the minor league level. With Hernandez, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I'm just one of those people that believe sometimes it's time to cut ties. If Hernandez made the roster, we'd have people complaining about it too. There was no way around it. That last bullpen spot, there wasn't a perfect pick for it. Hernandez wasn't great in spring training. Stratton wasn't. Steven Cruz wasn't good enough, in my opinion, though I'd expect to see him at some point in the year. Evan Sisk, same thing there. Noah Cameron, they want him to stay as a starter. But with Hernandez or Stratton, Hernandez was out of options. Stratton has another year on his contract, and he's somebody that can give you some length in the bullpen. And if he's figured out the command problem, he's got the good spin rate on the curveball, and if he's throwing in low leverage spots and he just can get outs and not let the lead balloon, he can be fine in that role. But for Hernandez, I do wish him the best of luck. He was a great guy to cover. And if he catches on in Philadelphia, all the better for him. And for the Royals, hopefully that bullpen can only get stronger this year. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, check out the Locked On Fantasy Baseball Podcast with hosts Dominic Martino and Matthew Ane. MLB Fantasy Draft season is here. Be the most informed fan and set yourself up for a league win. Find Locked On MLB Podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we'll recap a little bit of what we saw in Arlington tonight and get you ready for opening day, which is just a few days away. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.